Hey folks, so today I'm going to be painting a Sylvaneth Dryad. So I've already gone ahead, I primed it in black and white, and then I used Dryad Bark as the base. So you can see that I just did 2 coats actually in the base to just really make sure that I got that saturated color. So now I'm going to be going through with the Gorthor Brown and doing a layer. I'm using a standard brush to do this layer. You want something that has a pretty good tip, I like for these layers, just so I can be a little bit precise, but a decent sized brush so that it covers a good amount of area. So what I'm doing is I'm just kind of going through and getting all of the high points of the miniature, letting those shadows stay that Dryad Bark. Sorry about the focus here, but really trying to add just that layer to help bring out a little bit more of that contrast between the 2 different shades of brown. So with painting wood, it's a lot about different shades of brown, and the nice thing about wood is you don't have to be super precise. It can be a little streaky because that can actually give a little bit of a wood effect. So I actually really like doing dry brushes for the top layers on wood, just to give it that little bit more organic look to it. So I'm just going through and hitting all of those high areas, and I will continue doing this on the entire model. Alright, so there you go. I've done actually 2 layers with this lighter brown to bring out the contrast. And now I'm going to go through with the Skrag Brown, a kind of red brown, to do the skirt type thing on the Dryad, just to add contrast between the 2 different browns. So I like going through with this. The other one you kind of saw me start and pull it in. This one, just because of the contrast, I'm starting kind of in the crevices and pulling it out. That just, you know, different techniques to bring out different parts of the mini. And some of it really is kind of how you get your brush in there, what's easiest. So there, it was a little difficult to get the brush in and pull it out, so I started out and pulled in. But just trying to get an even coat across, and still not getting the whole bits of that skirt. I left some space so that you do have those shadows still kind of with the Dryad Bark, so the crevices and stuff like that. I'm really just hitting the topmost bits in this reddy brown. I've been having some fun times painting up all of these different dryads, doing slightly different looks on each. Keeping a lot of the base colors the same, but then doing some of the layers and details a little different, just to give each one their own little personality. Alright, so I've painted on that. You can really start to see the contrast, and now I'm going to go through with Agrax Earthshade and add in that shade. So with this, I'm just actually using a really inexpensive water paint brush. I found that works really well for shades, just because it is so much of that ink kind of water paint texture. It holds a lot of the paint and lets you be a little bit more precise with how much you put down. And I'm being maybe a little bit heavier handed on this shade than I should have been. I actually did have to go back through. You're seeing a little bit here, and I do it again on this face where I put too much on. But the way that I get around that is drying off the brush a bit and then pulling it back over, and it just kind of sucks up that shade. So you can do that if you get it where you don't want it, or you put down too much. Alright, so there you go. That is the whole thing front shaded, and now I'm doing the back, pulling it up. And I think the important thing with doing the shade is to really make sure you're getting into where the shadows are. So you can see kind of below the head, and then through this bit I'm kind of pulling it up into the crotch area of this dryad, just because that's going to be the part that the light hits the least, so it would be the deepest shadow. So again, I'm kind of pulling it up. I dried off my brush a little bit to help with the control of where exactly I'm putting that shade. And just kind of doing an all-over wash here. And what I will do is I'll go back through with some of the same colors or similar colors to add more of that contrast between the shade and the lighter parts of the model. Alright, so there you go. Now, I did notice that the shades, even when it was fully dry, it still had a wet look, but this will kind of get resolved when I do end up basing or sealing it. So I'm going back through with the Skrag Brown, and I'm going to be going back over the skirt part. I'm using a much smaller brush so I can be a lot more precise and really just get kind of the top bits of that skirt, those skirt wood pieces, really just using this as kind of a highlight to up the contrast. So I'm not pulling it all the way over, I'm leaving so that there's a little bit of the original Skrag Brown with the wash on it, and then you now have this additional layer that just adds, it really ups that color and makes it a little bit more saturated. Alright, so I'm using the Gorthor Brown to go back through and do a layer basically over all of the rest of the Dryad. I am paying attention to kind of where would the light be hitting the most, you know, not making sure not to get down in those crevices to up that contrast, but using this as a layer to up the contrast, add a little bit more. And there are bits that I don't fully blend it in. I kind of transition a little bit between that and the previous color, so that you know, it does have that wood mottled uneven effect. That's kind of the nice thing with the Dryads. It is a little bit more forgiving because it's wood textured. You can see I'm using a technique just to steady my hand a little bit where I'll rest my pinky. I found is a really good way of resting it on the mini or on the base. Now you can see I've gone through and done a whole layer with the Gorthor Brown, so that's up that contrast. But I'll rest my pinky somewhere, and I found that just helps steady my hand. Now I'm going to go through with the Sylvaneth Bark and just do a dry brush. So this dry brush that I'm using is actually a e.l.f. eyeshadow brush. I found that inexpensive makeup brushes actually make really good dry brushes. You can't usually find really small ones, so it really only works for stuff where you have quite a bit, or you can be a little less precise with what you dry brush. But I really like how evenly this brush applies paint. And for those who don't know, dry brushing is you take a little bit of paint on the brush, you wipe most of it off until the brush is almost dry, and then you very quickly move it back and forth, as you can see over the mini. I tend to use this to focus on the points on the mini where light would be hitting naturally, to really bring out that contrast. And then with the Dryads, I've been focusing a lot on the face and the hands, just to bring those out a little bit more of focus points. So I've gone ahead and dry brushed this over the whole thing, and now I'm going to use Karak Stone. It's a layer paint, but I'm actually using it as a dry brush just to do some really key pieces. So I'm doing like the face, the hands, and the very tips of the branches, really to up that contrast. So you can kind of see that face really popping out now. It differentiates it from the rest of the body and really makes it easier, much easier to see the details of the miniatures. I'm also using this very strategically on kind of the very bits that would get the most light to up that contrast, and still make it up the contrast, but also still make it make sense with where would the light be hitting the model. So those top bits, so you can see I'm doing the tips of the branches here. And then I actually move the model so I'm looking almost down on it to really get those the light effect. Alright, so there you go. That's the dry brush. 2 layers of dry brush, and the important thing is to wait between layers to let them dry. So now I'm going back through with the Karak Stone to do some detail stuff. I'm using a very fine detail brush to paint in. There's some twigs on this mini. Whoops, focus again. And then I also went through and painted the tips of the horns and right around the face to really bring out some of the facial features, like the eyebrows, kind of the cheekbones, that I found really makes that face contrast out, and you notice it a little bit more. It doesn't get muddled in with the rest of the brown by using this really light color. You could also blend out a white with one of the browns that you're using to get this kind of effect. So there you go, you can see, and now I'm going through and I'm doing just the very tips of the claws. I really like that effect. It makes it a little bit more claw-like. There you go. And I also did the tips of the branches as well. So now I'm going to go through with the Mephiston Red and paint the little leaves that are on this mini. I wanted this miniature to kind of have a bit of a autumn theme to it, hence the really orangey skirt part and then the red leaves. So I'm just using a very fine brush because it is these very small leaves and painting this as the base coat. I also used this to go in and paint the eyes, and doing the eyes was very, very delicate, pretty much just getting paint on the very tip of the brush and just touching it in very carefully. I did get a little bit on the eyebrow ridge, but I'll go back through with the Karak Stone and touch that up. So now I'm using this brighter red to do the highlights on the leaves using a super fine brush. And I'm just doing the very edges, kind of each, depending on where the light hits it, doing either side of each leaf. So that really lets that center kind of be a little bit deeper. You could also use a orange here to kind of have transitioning leaves. I really like the just full-on red look. There's a tree outside our house that has red leaves that I really like right now. I also use this to go in and just do a little tiny dot on the eyes. That really brings a bit more depth to the eyes, if you can add some kind of pupil essentially to it. And I realized here that I did not do, there is a tongue on this one, so I'm going back through with the red to do the tongue. Now you could very easily do the eyes a contrasting color to the leaves, but the rest of the army has red eyes, so I thought I'd keep that consistent. So there you go. Now I'm just going back through and doing that quick touch up where I kind of painted a little bit of the eyebrow. And I actually like this. I went back and did a little bit more around, just bringing out a few of the fangs and stuff like that, adding a little bit more of that saturated Karak Stone. So there you go. There is the finished miniature. You know, a pretty quick paint, and it's almost tabletop ready. I still need to do the basing, but I'm pretty happy. That gives you a nice autumn colored Sylvaneth Dryad that you could easily put on your table and play with. So I want to give a special thanks to all of our patrons, especially Sean, Joan, Arby, Lainey, and Bryce. If you're interested in helping support us, helping us paint more minis and film them and show them to you, you can head over to patreon.com/rollforinitiative and check out the perks of being a patron. Thank you so much for watching. If you're playing Age of Sigmar, let me know what army you're playing, especially if you're playing Sylvaneth. Do you have a theme that you're going with? I'm kind of going with a 4 seasons theme, so you might be seeing some future videos of the other seasons coming up soon. Let me know in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next time on Roll for Initiative. Bye!